Welcome back, crew. It's September, and that means we're diving into the Old Gods of Appalachia as our tabletop RPG of the month. And today, we're diving into what makes the system tick. We're going to be going through the core non combat mechanics of Old Gods, showing you the ins and outs of how to run this game so you can feel confident bringing it to your table. But before we do that, quick shout out. We're going to be running our live actual play this Thursday at 7 p.m. of the Old Gods of Appalachia RPG. So make sure you come through and get to see me and my crew put this system through its paces, showing off its mechanics, having a fun story, and as always, giving away a free copy of the core rulebook so more people can join in the fun of the game. But this time, I want to give a major shout out to Shanna Germain, the creator of the Old Gods of Appalachia system, because we're not just giving away a PDF. One lucky viewer will have a chance to take home both the PDF as well as a hardcover copy of the core rulebook so you can have it on your shelf and get to experience some of this amazing art live in person. One restriction, you have to be in the US, but outside of that, make sure you come through this Thursday at 7 p.m. right here on T&J Gaming for your chance to win and get to see this amazing system live in action. But let's dive in. Today we're going over the core mechanics of the system outside of combat. We're going to show you how everything works with the old god system. One thing I do want to give a quick shout out for before we dive in. We covered this in our player PC build video, but wanted to make sure you know these core mechanics as we go through. With the old gods of Appalachia, you have three core stats: might, speed, and intellect. And with those stats, you have pools. So whatever that stat is will be your pool for it, and certain actions require you to spend from that pool to be able to do whatever you're doing. Sometimes it's ability, sometimes it's an action, sometimes you may take damage from that stat. So, one thing to keep in mind as we go through, the other thing that you should remember as we kind of go through some of the other mechanics is the effort system. You could spend 3 points of one of your skills from your pool to be able to bring the difficulty down by one, easy, which we'll go into a little bit more. So just remember that you have those two mechanics in the back of your pocket as we go through and touch on some of the other pieces. So one thing too, quick shout out, love the art of the system, really captures kind of the old gods of Appalachia's podcast feel. But let's get into how you take actions and how the system operates. So this system's a D20 game. So most of your rolls are going to roll that D20 and it'll take the result from there. With this system, though, one of the things they recommend is so there's gonna be items that are routine. Like let's say you wanted to go walk across the room and open the door, and nothing crazy is in this room. It's just a typical room and a typical door. That'd be a routine action. There'd be no reason to roll for that unless you're impaired in some way that would make that harder than normal. But let's say you're doing something unique, something that would require a little bit of skill, a little bit of extra effort. You're going to roll that d20. And with this system, the way that you kind of determine the DCs is you're going to have difficulty. And that difficulty. And let's take a look at this table here with the different difficulty levels. So you've got simple all the way up to impossible. So your game master will go through and set the difficulty. We'll say starts off at a standard operation. You're trying to swim through a raging river, but I mean, it's not too complicated. It's something that a normal person can kind of swim across this length. So it's going to be a simple roll. So that's a DC, or that's a difficulty of two. With this system, you're going to multiply that task difficulty by three, and that's going to determine your target number. So with two times three, that's going to be six. And the nice thing, if you have a table in front of you, you don't even have to do multiplication. That's going to give us our target number. So when you roll that d20, you're going to want to get six or above to be successful in your action. So, with this system, there are also skills as well. But if you're coming from 5e or Pathfinder, skills work a little bit different than you're used to. So, skills are going to ease the the difficulty of the task. And we're going to kind of pop back up to the glossary here so you can kind of see what ease means. But basically, what it does is decreases the task difficulty by one step. So if you're trained in the skill, you would reduce it by one. If you're specialized in a skill, you reduce it by two. So you've got only two skill rankings, trained and specialized, and those will all combine together to help you reduce your task difficulty. So let's say with that swimming example, let's say our guy is a specialized swimmer. He's swimming his creek every day growing up, and he's real strong at it. That easing by two would make that a routine task. So even though it is a raging river, he could just crisscross it without having to worry about rolling the dice. Now, on the opposite side, certain things can hinder it. Let's say it is raining as this river is raging, making the waters churn even worse than they normally would. That could hinder it, bringing that difficulty up by one, making it a difficulty three task. So we'd still have to roll. So easing and hindering are usually kind of the two big levers that are going to change the difficulty. But one of the nice things with this system, especially looking at the table, is outside of having to do the multiplication, which you typically, if you have the table in front of you, you don't have to worry about adding in modifiers. You basically just roll the d20 and take a look at it and see if you're successful or not. Along with skills, one of the things that can also help you reduce that DC outside of effort, which we've already covered, are assets. So let's say you had a life jacket as you're trying to cross that river. Not sure if that actually be helpful, but let's say it is helpful. That can also reduce your pass difficulty by 1 point. So let's say we're sticking to that other example where it's raining. We've got a three difficulty with our swimming being specialized. Then I'd put it back down to a routine task and make it easy for us. So that's kind of the flow of everything. Your game master determines what the task difficulty are. You bring in skills, assets, items, whatever may be going on. Even if you use the environment to kind of set yourself up to see if you can get easiest to bring that difficulty down. Then you make your roll. Pretty straightforward system, and it kind of fits pretty well with kind of the narrative feel of Old Gods. Because if you listen to the podcast, it definitely does have that storyteller's bent. A lot of these mechanics, once you get used to them, are pretty straightforward. It really won't pull you out of the game to have to know them. With this, though, one of the things, this is a little bit of a thorn of mine, but definitely kind of a cool mechanic still. With this system, the players are always the one that roll the dice. So kind of similar to a play powered by the apocalypse style game. The game master doesn't roll, the players roll, and based off the rolls, you kind of determine what happens. But you also get one of the really cool elements of this game, which are GM intrusions. So while the GM can't roll the dice, they can make things happen. With a game master intrusion, basically there's two ways you can go about it. The way they kind of built the system around is you'll pick one player, and you'll get to throw a curveball at them. Doesn't have to necessarily be something bad, but something that can make their lives harder, add a new narrative element to the story, or just kind of really increase the stakes and make the story keep flowing along. So like let's say in our example with this guy swimming across this raging river, let's say a hawk reaches up from below the river and grabs him down. That could be a GM intrusion. So you're the game master. You say, "Hey, you are swimming across. You feel a leg pulling you underneath the water's surface." That happens. So there's no roll necessary for it. The game master says it, and it typically happens. But when that does happen, the game master gives the player they pick. If they recommend you picking one player to give them that chance in the spotlight, gives them one XP. So they get an XP for their efforts, and XP can be used to do player intrusions, to advance to different tiers, which are levels in this system. They can a whole bunch of different things. So you get an XP for doing that. One of the cool things I think too is you get a second XP. You can't give it to yourself, but you can give it to one of the other party members. And for homebrew, I would probably use it. You give it to the party member who you think has like been kind of given some cool RP or cool hasn't even been involved too much in the story to kind of just help bring him in. So they have that extra point that they can spend on intrusions or advancements, whatever they may do. But one of the things you can do, so let's say you're the player and you don't want to be pulled down underneath the waves of this river. If you have XP you can spend a point and say, hey, I'm able to when I feel that hand come down, kick him with my boot and pull myself off and able to stay above the water's edge. And that becomes what happens in the fiction. So you don't with that you don't get the XP for either the one for yourself or the one giveaway. You just spend 1 point, and whatever that narrative or GM intrusion was doesn't happen. One thing they recommended though for players too, still always kind of go through and spin that point and kind of stop the narrative from happening. They said something in their playtest that seemed like it happened pretty rarely. But just to keep in mind is to keep the narrative flowing. It definitely do kind of fits best for your play style, but definitely try to help the game master keep the narrative flowing when you can, because this is one of their core levers with the system. But let's say outside of picking on one player, you want to pick on them all. You can definitely do that. They said to use this sparingly because using the GM intrusions can be a great way to give players spotlights and kind of have them come up with some creative solutions. Sometimes you want to throw the whole party into the thick of it, and you can do so. What happens is everybody gets one XP point, but there's no community XP point to give away. So it's just that inherent one, and you get to go from there. So those are GM intrusions. Players also have intrusions they can do too. Theirs are a little bit more limited in scope, but it gives them a way to kind of take control of the narrative and kind of make something happen that traditionally wouldn't happen as well. If you watched our PC video, some of the or the player intrusions are listed out based off of your character type. So you take a look at those, but you also can just kind of do something small with the narrative. One of the examples they gave was with the ciphers, which are kind of special items that you can bring to bear. You can give yourself an extra recharge of that cipher. But one thing that said was outside of your scope, you couldn't say, "Hey, I find some medicine and heal myself all the way up." So just kind of little things that help advance the narrative. And one thing I would recommend as a player for this, look at different ways you can kind of enhance the story too. Like, don't try to give yourself a win button. Find a way to move the narrative forward. Help increase tensions and help kind of increase just the stakes of the story with whatever you do. So definitely my advice there. But those are kind of cool ways the players and the game master can interact with the narrative without having to roll a dice. But let's get back to dice rolls. So there's special rolls of the system. Some of the obvious ones, nat ones and nat 20s, but this system has a couple extra ones too. So Nat one of this system causes a GM intrusion to happen. So whether it be in combat, skill, roll outside of combat, the game master gets to have something happen. But with this one, you don't get the XP that you would for just a random GM intrusion. Also, this system has a little bit of a unique one where the high dice roll, 17 through 20, get a little extra oomph to them. So if you're rolling this during combat with a 17 and 18, you get a +1 or +2 to damage for 17 and 18 respectively. But 19 and 20 actually have some special effects both in and outside of combat. For in combat, 19 gets you +3 damage, a 20 gets you +4. You also can get a minor or major effect. What the minor effects do are kind of usually small things outside of the narrative. You may you repair a weapon, it may work a bit better, or you may just if you try to convince somebody of something, they may just take a little bit of extra shine to you. Just something small that you can do to kind of just tweak the narrative a little bit. Or in combat, you can use them to do things like distract or knock back a target or strike a specific body part and hope they let somebody go. Like if say you had a typical monster wrapped up one of your crew, you can hit him in that specific body part and see if you can kind of hack it off or set your person free. Now, major effects, those ones are going to be a little bit bigger. Major effects are going to allow you to do a couple of big things in combat. You can disarm and tear somebody, which is pretty nasty. All of their attempts throughout the combat are going to be hindered, bringing them up one difficulty level. You can knock them down, you can stun them and make them lose their next action. All of those based off that nat 20. Or outside of combat, you may be able to do something in half the time it's expected, or do something so well it impresses everybody around you. They just get that extra little oomph from what you're doing. So, last big things we're going to cover on this side. So, you could attempt in this game to retry a task that's been done after a failure. Well, what they do is they have to retry, but you have to add a level of effort. So with effort, we went through, you spend 3 points from whatever skill pool you're using, and you have to add that in, and you get to retry it. So it's going to cost you some points, but you can give it another go. I know that's sometimes what people do is that people like to skill pile. I like that they have kind of options within the game that kind of impact that and hopefully discourage that, or at least have it come with a cost when the players do so. And finally, some options within the game. So let's say we're swimming through that raging river, but the game master says to even attempt this, you're going to have to spend some points. You have to spend 3 might points even just to get a roll at this. So some of those options can have initial cost with those. Don't forget about your edges though, because you could use your edges to be able to kind of remove some of those costs, so you don't have to pay the full penalty. But yeah, this was kind of a quick run through of the core mechanics of the Old Gods of Appalachia system outside of combat. Come by tomorrow. We're doing back to back episodes. We're going to be diving into the combat sections of Old Gods of Appalachia, showing you how to fight those Hawks and Hanks and Hollow Men that plague the world. So make sure you don't miss that. And then definitely make sure to come by this Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time for our live actual play of the system and your chance to win not just the PDF of the core rulebook, copy of the hardcover too for your system. Shout outs to Shanna for that. Yeah, thanks for hanging out, guys. Like, subscribe. Shout out something cool in the comments you like for this system, too. One of the core mechanics you think really set it apart. But thanks for hanging out, everybody. Till next time.